Hi everybody, welcome to another makeover, and in today's video I'm going to be refinishing this beauty. I found it on Facebook Marketplace and there was quite a competition for this piece, but I was the first, so I got it. I don't mind painted furniture and I kind of like this piece. I like the glazing, I like the colors, but I was absolutely sure that there was a treasure under the white paint. But while I was working with this piece every day, I thought that I would never do it again. Wood grain and some white paint, you know what I mean. They don't really go well together. But I saw a potential in this piece, so I started as usual with the scraping. I got some questions in a comment about why I choose scraping or stripping or sanding. And right now I'm preparing the video, my next video, where I explain everything in great detail. In this case, I just thought that it could be easier to remove the paint with a scraper, easier and faster. Maybe in the video it looks like that, but it wasn't. I only have scraped the paint and I couldn't get into the old top coat. So I decided to jump to the stripping. I've heard a lot of good responses about this Smart Strip. It's a Nika stripper. It doesn't stink, which is important for me because I work in my basement. And it promises to remove up to 15 coats of an old finish, which is fantastic promise. That is why I decided to give it a try, even if it's kind of pricey. Here in Canada, this little container costs $50 and I used the whole thing on this one dresser. I applied a thick coat of the stripper, covered it in plastic to prevent drying, and let it sit for about 3 hours. And in my opinion, 3 hours, that's a lot. If you don't have any other project to work with, or if you don't have anything to do, that's a lot of time. I had all 6 drawers to strip, and I decided to give a try the other new for me brand of the stripper. And I'm not gonna show you the name of that brand because it didn't work and it stank. Oh my gosh, it stank big time. I only could strip that much and I had to use the stripper I usually use, which is circa 1850. I checked the Smart Stripper in 1 hour and it worked, but I decided to keep it for 3 hours to get into the original finish of the dresser. And after 3 hours, a miracle didn't happen. The stripper worked okay, but it didn't go through 15 layers. I could only strip the paint, but the old finish stayed there. But I bought it and I had to use it. And before applying the stripper to the sides of the dresser, I decided to take the base off so I could work with it while my stripper would be doing its job. I remember someone on YouTube applied the stripper and let it sit over the night, and I decided to do the same thing. The base was covered with the same paint, but there was only one coat of it. And as usual, there was a thin coat of an old finish, so I could scrape off the paint and the finish at the same time. Next day, I came back to my stripper and it almost dried out. It was so hard to scrape it, but I knew what to do. If you ever have the same problem, all you need to do to reactivate the stripper is to apply a little bit of more stripper. And in this case, I sprayed some water because the stripper was water-based. But still, it didn't go through the old finish. And at this point, I thought that the stripper is not as good as advertised. But the spoiler, it wasn't a stripper. There was a special top coat on this piece. After first coat of stripper, I tried to scrape the old finish, but it didn't go well and I didn't film it. So I applied one more coat of the stripper. I was hoping that it would help to destroy the old finish. But after sitting there, I believe for 2 hours, it did nothing. Well, not completely nothing. It kind of moisturized the old top coat, but still I couldn't strip it off. And I was like, I can't scrape it. I can't strip it with the Eco Stripper, so there goes the chemical stripper. But guess what? The chemical stripper didn't work. I mean, it did, kind of, but it didn't. You know what I like about projects like this? They don't go smooth, but they make you to learn something new. For example, I had known some common information about the lacquer. But with this project, I learned in details about every type of lacquer finishes. And I found out that the previous finish most likely was the post-catalyst lacquer. The post-catalyst varnish is a very strong finish, and all of my strippers were not strong enough to get rid of it. What they did, they helped soften the old finish so I could scrape and sand it off. But sanding didn't go that easy as well. I started with 80 grit sandpaper. Even if it was a veneer, I decided to take risk because I wanted to get rid of that finish. And the funny thing, it didn't work. What actually helped was using a higher grit of sandpaper. I used 120 and 150 grit, and it took me forever, and it did work. But in some spots the old finish was still there. And honestly, I didn't know what to do because I didn't have a professional wood stripper. And even if I found it, I don't have a very well ventilated area to use it. I was kind of desperate and I decided to try hand sanding. And it actually worked. I was surprised. One of the strongest top coats and hand sanding? Seriously? Honestly, I was absolutely sure that using the power tools is the most effective way of sanding, but probably not. On the drawers, the top coat was much thinner, so I was able to scrape it and sand it off. I tried to take off the drawer spools, but it was kind of tricky. They were glued together pretty good. I broke one, and that was where I stopped trying. I could have probably used some hot water and tried to dissolve the glue, but they were sitting so tight and I was afraid that I could cause more damage, so I left them at their places. I just sanded them by hands and the finish there was even thinner and it came off pretty easily. For the areas where I couldn't reach with my sandpaper, I poured some stripper and I used my wire brush and that little manicure tool. While finishing sanding with 220 grit sandpaper, I found out that there were still tiny pieces of white paint here and there in the wood grain. I applied a thin coat of my chemical stripper and then I used my wire brush again. It is a brass wire brush. You can use a nylon brush, but for me brass works better. Here's the top and the same thing, some paint in the wood grain. Once my top and the drawers dried, I hand sanded them with 220 grit. And the last step before applying the top coat is to do the base. I sanded starting with 100 grit sandpaper and finished with 220. I was not going to use any stain on this piece, but as you can see, the base is a different type of wood. It is solid elm and it is much lighter than walnut. To match the color of the dresser, I stained it in two steps. First was the water-based stain in the color Amaretto. And once the water-based stain completely dried, I applied very thin early American oil-based stain. On the front part, I burned through veneer here and there. To fix that, I used furniture repairing kit from Amazon and it's actually quite handy. The only thing is, sometimes it could be hard to match exactly the same color, especially when you mix two different colors of wood filler together, because it dries a bit darker. But honestly, it's not a big deal. I noticed that because I know it, but when my husband looks at the same spot, he doesn't notice anything. One of the drawers was broken and I usually do this type of repairs before I start doing anything else, but I didn't notice it was broken until this moment. So I squeezed some glue in there, I clamped it and I set it aside to dry for about 2 hours. While one of my drawers was drying, I started applying the top coat to the other drawers. I used Black Forest Furniture Monocoat Oil Finish. I've been using it for a while and I'm absolutely in love with this top coat. This is a mix of different oils. It penetrates into the wood and it dries into hard top coat layer. It was developed for the dining tables and once it's cured, it's water resistant and scratch resistant. And it is all natural finish. I don't mind lacquer finishes, but I can't use lacquer because I work in a basement and I don't have good ventilation. I don't mind water-based polyurethane finishes and I use them sometimes. But for wooden furniture, for veneered furniture, for me this one is the best solution and the coverage is awesome. To the small surfaces, I applied the oil by hand using white or gray pad. And for the bigger surfaces like the top and the sides of the dresser, I use my orbital sander. If you guys have made this far and you like this type of content, don't forget to give this video a thumb up and hit the subscribe button. It would mean the world to me. I let my oil cure for 24 hours and then I started putting everything back together. The full curing time for this oil is 7 days, but you can start using it in 24 hours, lightly using. I know nobody's gonna see this bottom part, but for aesthetic sakes, I sanded it and I stained it with early American color. This dresser had old metal glides and one of them was broken, so I replaced them with plastic non-scratched ones. And as a last touch, I applied Howard beeswax and orange oil to insides and outsides of the drawers. Do you remember how this dresser looked before? And here's the after. I love this beautiful walnut wood grain and those solid walnut drawer pulls. And I think the elm base blended in just right. But my favorite one is the top. It looks like one big solid piece of veneer and it's gorgeous. It was so much work, but what do you think? Was it worth it? I think it was, because it looks just awesome. Thanks for watching guys and see you in the next video.